I heard somebody say this. If we want to price things based on utility, oxygen would be the most expensive thing in the world. I think that's just the basic. That's just the basics of it, right? Oxygen is free, but because it's abundant, we have as much of it as we want to. Nobody can stop you from having oxygen, even if they tried. Like they can block your nose, they can close your mouth, of course, but you're probably going to be dead before you can pay them for oxygen, right? So the thing about oxygen is that it's abundant. We need it to survive. It has that utility, but it's free. On the other hand, we have something like gold. I think gold is useful to a lot of people, but it's a lot less useful than oxygen. Gold is a lot more expensive than oxygen because of the it's not abundant. It's not easily found everywhere in the world. So I think that just kind of, I think that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people when you look at it from that perspective. But I also think that Bitcoin separates money from utility. So before Bitcoin, money had to have utility because somebody had to want it. In terms of Bitcoin, that's completely different because Bitcoin, we know for a fact that Bitcoin is the only certain thing in the world. We know for a fact that there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. We know for a fact that there's never going to be more than that. We can't change that number. People want it because of that. People want it because of that 21 million. People want it because they can use it to transact on the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin technically does have utility because you can use it. It's the only thing that you can use to pay for transaction fees. But if you get away from that, Bitcoin doesn't need to have utility to work. Money doesn't have to have utility to work. All you need is something that can store value. It can be a medium of exchange, and it can be a unit of account. Other people need to want it. It needs to have these certain characteristics: fungibility, scarcity, durability, all those characteristics. It needs to have that. Bitcoin has all those characteristics. It doesn't need to be something that you can use. Like you can use gold as a paperweight. Who's using gold as a paperweight? You can use gold as you can use gold in electronics. How many people are using gold in electronics? They're not. They're just keeping it in their safe. They don't really care about the use in electronics. All they care about is you have to go back to first principles. They care about the scarcity. They care about the fact that nobody else can print gold. And that's what makes gold so special. That's what makes gold such great money. It makes gold such a great financial product because nobody can print it. Nobody can create it out of thin air and add more of it to the economy. Same thing with Bitcoin. People say that Bitcoin is digital gold, and that's because Bitcoin has all of the characteristics that gold has, but it's digital. You can't send gold over the internet to somebody else. You can't transact with gold. How many people are even using gold to transact today? Gold is the most valuable asset in the world. It's worth $19 trillion. Nothing else even comes close. I think the next most valuable asset's like $3.53 trillion, whatever it is. One of these companies, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia. But people aren't using gold for its utility. They just have it in safes. Like I have an ounce of gold that's just sitting there. I haven't used it for anything. I haven't used it. I haven't made electronics with it. It's just sitting in one of my drawers. It's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. I'm just holding it because it's scarce. So the utility doesn't really matter. So the people who do say that utility is what we need, I don't think they quite understand it. I think they're trying to sell you some kind of narrative that they believe, and they don't quite understand it, again, from first principles, like from the basis of thinking.
Yeah, it's wild that you say that, because you just made me think of too, like it goes back to earlier we were talking about this. It's because it's like the cash flow dividends yield. Those are a justification for holding fiat. It's like this.
Yeah.
It's like this trick being played of like, well, I'm getting these things, so I'll hold the fiat, I guess. And similar to gold, I never thought of gold that way, but gold, because it was the best, and this is where people get confused. It was the best thing we had for thousands of years. There wasn't anything better we had. So we had this thing, it was the best, but there's still an inflation rate. There's a mining rate of around 2% a year, right? So in order to justify holding it, you had this utility. You had utility in order to justify, well, I can use it in other things. Like you said, the utility is kind of what justified someone holding it. Like, well, I can do X with it, and it is the most scarce thing I have, so it has it. But like you said, Bitcoin just is, because it is the best money we've ever found, perfectly finite. You can just hold it. And like the environmental application, all these things that are actually happening opposite of what the average person thinks, actually cleaning up the environment, doing these things that you couldn't do. It actually does have utility, but that's like a whole different conversation. But just being perfect money, in essence, or triple ledger money accounting system, that right there is is the game changer, where it's like,
Yeah.
I don't need the utility in order to justify using Bitcoin. Really fascinating.
Yeah.
I love that explanation. Where do you think the global hash rate, and it feels like the global hash rate is obviously like kind of going exponential right now, but like, where do you feel like there's this moment, or do you see something, at least when you're looking at everything, that kind of sparks off this global hash wars, global hash race? I know Max Kaiser talked about this for a long time. Countries, because it feels like we are literally like in a tinderbox. Putin's talking about it, all these different things going on. And it just feels like at some point something just tips off, and it's just off to the races. And it feels that way. It felt like that way for a little bit. Was there something that you're kind of looking at, or you're waiting for, to as that, like, hey, here we go moment?
I don't think there's going to be a here you go kind of moment like that. Maybe the strategic Bitcoin reserve, maybe that'll
Mm-hmm.
get things to go crazy. But even the hash rate, it's going to keep increasing. That's why I think that it's very difficult to invest in mining companies. I actually had
Yeah.
some leaps on Bit farms. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you know them. I had
Yeah.
some leaps over the last 2 years. I expected them to do great when Bitcoin rises because they hold Bitcoin. But the issue is that with mining companies, it's very difficult to invest in them because there's always going to be more competition. So you can keep buying mining companies, you can keep trying to find the best mining company, but over time I think there's going to be more and more competition. More and more countries are going to try to mine for Bitcoin. We know Bhutan is mining for Bitcoin. So there's always going to be competition for these companies that are mining for Bitcoin, and that's their main business. That's partly why I don't like investing in mining companies, because there's always somebody who can disrupt them. Just like every other business, if you can just hold on to Bitcoin, I think that's probably the best way to go. And I think that's where things are going. If we have the US starting a strategic Bitcoin reserve, Canada should start a strategic Bitcoin reserve with the tariffs that are coming in. I don't know when they're going to do it. I don't know if they're going to do it, but they should. I think that's the only way, that's the only solution for them. I think holding Bitcoin is the only solution. You can start a business, you can try mining for Bitcoin as a country, but if you don't have the underlying asset, then there's nothing that you can do to protect yourself. Your miners can be taken from you. Miners are physical, like the ASICs are physical, so somebody can come over and take them from you. So I think I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but I think the main thing that's going to really spark people is the fact that countries are starting to accumulate. I even think then people are still going to continue to ignore it. The average person doesn't have time for this. The average person is spending so much time at work. They're spending so much time with their family, their friends. They have hobbies. They want to watch TV. They want to go on Instagram. They want to play video games. They want to do all this. So you can't even blame them, right? Because over time, it's just getting harder and harder to make ends meet. So they have to put all of this time towards the things that they need to do to decompress. You can't blame them for wanting to watch TV. You can't blame them for wanting to forget about the day that they had. You can't blame them for drinking. You can't blame them for doing any of that, because life is just getting harder. It's inherently just getting harder. And it's going to continue to get harder. It's going to continue to get harder. So I think what's going to happen is most people are going to ignore this. I don't think there's going to be a spark for most people. You have to actually be aware that something is happening for you to actually adopt Bitcoin, right? For me, for example, if FTX hadn't collapsed, I probably wouldn't have paid attention to Bitcoin at all. If he hadn't had that massive collapse from Terra Luna, whatever it was, if they hadn't collapsed, I probably wouldn't have been paying attention to Bitcoin. If Bitcoin had just gone straight up, I would have ignored it because I would have thought, oh, it's too expensive. What's the point of buying it now? I can't get to one Bitcoin. It's over. It's too expensive. I can't get it. So I think what's going to happen is a lot of people are just going to ignore it because, for all we know, in this current cycle, because it's basically backed by these institutions that can create more money, that can keep borrowing more money, like Michael Saylor. Like the amount of money that Michael Saylor can get is pretty much unlimited because he's buying this asset that he can use as collateral, and the value of this asset keeps going up, and he basically can control the price of this asset now. He can keep buying more and more, he can keep pumping the price up, and he'll be able to borrow more and more money against that asset to buy more of it. So I personally think that a lot of people have I don't think a lot of people are going to get it. I don't think there's going to be a spark for most people because the price is probably not going to dump to where they want it to dump, and they're just going to forget about it. I have a lot of friends who, actually, I have one friend who I was telling about Bitcoin at 30K, and he ignored it. He said, "Oh, I'm going to buy it at 25K." Then I told him again at 70K. He said, "No, I'm going to buy it at 40, 35K, whatever the number was that you told me last time. I'll buy it then. If it drops back down, I'll buy it then." Then I told this friend again at 100K that Bitcoin, you should buy some, and he said, "I'll wait for it to go to 80K." he never ended up buying it because the price is just too high for people. They just don't want to get rid of their ego. Most people are just not willing to buy at a higher price than whatever they were first introduced to Bitcoin at. I think that's the thing that holds a lot of people back. And there's no spark that can change that. You can't change somebody's ego. There's nothing that a government can do. There's nothing that a strategic Bitcoin reserve can do to make those people change. And once those people finally figure it out, I think it'll be at a 10x, 100x from where it is today. And at that point, it's going to be too late. They're not going to be able to accumulate the same amount of Bitcoin that they can accumulate today. It's not going to be too late just in general. You're still going to be early to Bitcoin if somebody's willing to accept fiat for it. But at some point, they're not going to be able to afford the Bitcoin that they can today. So if somebody can afford 0.1 Bitcoin today, they're probably not going to open their eyes up to it until they can only afford 0.01 Bitcoin. I think that's what's going to happen. I think a lot of people are going to go through the pain. There's a guy on X, his name is Sunny. He says the beatings will continue until the education improves. So, and that's completely true. I completely agree. Most people are not going to get Bitcoin. They're not going to understand it until they put in the time to educate themselves on what it is.
Could not agree more. You touched on something too. I wanted to get your thought on was this just the selling pressure. The question really is, and then I'll kind of give context in a way, so we'll do it in reverse. But I want what are your price models, your USD to Bitcoin price models of that you kind of use or loosely use, or maybe there's some of your own models that you kind of look at. And why I was asking that was just you touched on MicroStrategy and what say BlackRock, nation states, mining, Bhutan, etc. Putin's talking about it. These are, and then SOB 121 getting repealed. These are things that decrease selling pressure. Like these people aren't going to sell Bitcoin. They don't have a need to sell Bitcoin, and people can lend against their Bitcoin. Again, that dries up the sell pressure, and the mining will be there obviously for a while, and that selling that's going on. But a lot of them, I mean, heck, you have more of these guys that are taking on debt, right? And they're putting Bitcoin on their own balance sheet. So it's this wild time that it's kind of like, and that's where I go to like this tinderbox too, in a way where it's like at some point the price is just going to run away so quickly that it's going to blow people away.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, then check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.